Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Motivation and That, where we take hot mess to high potential. I'm Natalie, your host. And today is going to be another episode for those compliance folks out there. My last one with Aisha was actually really well received. It was popular. Folks were tuning in. And so if you liked that, you're definitely going to love this one with Jessica Zeff of Simply Compliance, who is right here in the Pittsburgh area where I am. And we've had a chance to have breakfast at Pamela's and sit down and chat and get into kind of the fun components. And I say fun because it is fun of compliance and what makes a good, bad compliance leader program, and just all ways that this kind of industry has built and grown over the last 15, 20 years, which has been amazing to be a part of. And the other bonus of this is Jessica has her own podcast, Compliance Deconstructed, and we're going to have part 2 of this conversation over on her pod with a couple of other really fantastic compliance professionals. And so we'll get even more robust into some of these concepts and ideas, and it's going to be a really good time. So stay tuned for that in a couple of weeks, and we'll be making sure to cross promote all of these things. But with that, Jessica, thank you for joining. I want to give you a chance to kind of introduce yourself. What should people know about you when it comes to who you are, what your company does, how you got into this role in the first place? Because our journeys into compliance are all really fun and unique. I think we never really pick it.
They are.
When it comes to us. But tell us a little bit about you.
Well, first of all, thank you for the wonderful introduction. Now I've got to live up to it, Natalie. What have you done to me? But it has been a lot of fun. And I know this is what compliance professionals we consider fun. We go to Pamela's and then talk about what makes a really great compliance officer. No, but it's one of those conversations I think you can have with Natalie. She's one of the few people you can have that conversation with, just so you all know. So I'm Jessica Zeff. I run my own healthcare compliance consultancy called Simply Compliance. I've been doing that for coming up to 3 years at the moment. And, Natalie's right. You don't go to school to be a compliance officer. And the truth is, I kind of fell into it. So about 25 years ago, I ended up working for a hospital. I actually started my career in compliance in London, in England. Long story there. If you ever want to get to know it, Natalie knows it. Everyone else, it's on a need to know basis. But so I started my career working in healthcare compliance at a hospital in London. Of course, it wasn't called compliance back then. It was just something you kind of did. There wasn't this profession called, compliance. And I was really intrigued by the regulatory space. And I don't know how I feel when I say that. I feel awkward. It's like saying, yeah, I grew horns the other day. Isn't that wonderful? But for whatever reason, I was really intrigued by this regulatory space. So I went back to school and I got my master's in political science because I thought, well, that'll give me some perspective. Like, how do these regulations come about in the first place? Like, what's going on? What's the policy? I really wanted to understand, what was happening behind these regulations. And I thought, okay, that was really good. That was interesting. It gives me a better perspective, the pushes and the pulls. And sometimes you get, policies that succeed or fail. And, that feeds into kind of the success of regulations and how they operate. And then eventually I was like, I still think I'm missing a little something. I think, let me go to law school. Maybe this will give me some better perspective on what's going on. And I don't know that it gave me better perspective, but it was certainly a great experience. And I'm glad that I did it. Really understanding, how regulations are then, how they're arbitrated, like how they're interpreted, I think, and how they go through the courts and how you can have them challenged. I mean, from that perspective, going to law school was really great and very helpful, and really how to read case law and interpret it, and be able to pick up on trends and maybe make some forecasts about how certain decisions or behaviors in an organization in relation to regulations how that might pan out, right? And how to interpret. And then, by then I fell into this thing. Suddenly I was working for, it's called the Healthcare Commission. It's now the Care Quality Commission in England, but it's the regulator for the English national healthcare system. Their healthcare system is free at the point of use. So everything's regulated in England. Everything, you name it, is regulated. We complain about regulation in the US, but the truth is it could be worse. And that's really where I got into clinical compliance and corporate governance and privacy compliance. And I found that I really loved that space. And why did I love it? This comes to the heart of this particular conversation. Why did I love this regulatory compliance space? It was hard. It was challenging. It was not for the faint-hearted. So I know a lot of people, they think, oh, compliance, gosh, that's just a tick box exercise. You just check the box. These people are brainless. They don't know anything. The truth is, I would argue, it's quite the opposite. If you want to be a compliance professional, it takes such a range of skills. It is such a dynamic role. And you need to be resilient. You need to be analytical. You need to be comfortable working under pressure and in partnership and in conflict. But you also need to be diplomatic and tactful. And you need to have some foresight. You need to have a range of skills to deal with very different audiences. And at the same time, still be open and friendly. There's a persona there. And you're different people at different times because you have to be in order to do your job effectively. And we can go into that in a bit more detail. But the point is, I really fell in love with that role. I loved the challenge. It let me really flex my wings. And if you're up for that kind of challenge, then a compliance role is good for you. You're going to be great at it. If you look at it as something that you are if you are somebody that is comfortable being uncomfortable and having to think very quickly on your feet and come up with an approach, it might not be a solution right away, but if you can come up with a way of handling what's in front of you, even if it's coming up with a plan, I need to talk to so-and-so, or quickly, okay, an issue has come up. I need to investigate this issue. I wasn't expecting it. And you're thinking on your feet really quickly and coming up with a plan, and you know who to call and you know what to do. Then the compliance role, I think, is probably a good fit. But you have to be the right type of person for it. It's not for the faint-hearted. It is a very difficult role. And yeah, I really fell in love with it. I felt no day is the same. And compliance, certainly in the healthcare space, there's so much of it. Healthcare is so big. It's like no other industry. There's so many allied professions as well to healthcare. Like if you think life sciences or research, and there's so much of it. You could study and study and study, and you could learn and learn, and you could spend your whole lifetime doing this thing we call healthcare compliance, and you still wouldn't know it all. You still wouldn't have mastered it all. And even if you did, the world isn't black and white, so you never know what's going to pop up. And humans are wonderful. We're amazing. We have this wonderful propensity for coming up with surprises and the unusual, and for doing the unexpected. And that's, to me, a lot of what compliance is about. And in order to handle that, you've got to really enjoy it and be a certain kind of person and love learning and understand you may never know everything, and that's okay. And to me, that's why I've stayed in this space. There was no college degree. I kind of fell into it, and I'm really happy I fell into it. It challenges me every day, this profession that I've chosen, and I love it. I get to use my brain. I'm forced to outside of my comfort zone. I get to meet all kinds of people. I get to learn things that I never thought in life I would learn. I learn about people's behaviors. I learn about how organizations behave. I learn about how regulations work and don't work. I get to learn about how, some regulations, it's not a one size fits all. And you really have to think about operationalizing and applying regulations so that a range of different organizations uh, can actually comply with them, that they can operationalize them, they can actually make sense of them. Because if you can't, if you look at regulations as one size fits all, you're going to fail. It just doesn't work that way. So, for example, if I think of, let's say, privacy, what you'd expect maybe of a large hospital isn't going to be the same for your small therapy practice. So, and you've got to really understand that and know how HIPAA might apply in different settings. I mean, the core is the same, the goal is the same, but there are going to be differences in the application. So that when I moved back to the States from the UK, I realized, again, there's this whole world of compliance, right? And that's, to me, that's amazing. I know some people will take issue with that. They think of, regulations as being bureaucratic or unnecessary or difficult. And I get that, at the end of the day, I'm a normal person, just like anyone else. But in terms of a job and a career that I chose to do, the diversity. And so I landed in the States, and now you have a whole different regulatory landscape. And it was amazing. So now there's Medicaid, there's Medicare, there's HIPAA, there's all kinds of differences from, there's state law and all kinds of differences from where I was in Europe. So there's a quick learning curve, and it's amazing. It's brilliant. And again, if you're up for that challenge, then it's an amazing, wonderful experience for you. And that's what it was for me. And then eventually, I got to work for a tech company. And so again, we're talking Medicare, we're talking privacy, we're talking compliance. So my language is the same, my career is the same, but I'm working now not for a health plan, not for a regulator, I'm working for a tech company, and it's so new all over again. And what a wonderful experience, what a wonderful career. I've had a great time, and eventually got to a point where I thought, wait a minute, there's so much that I want to do, and there's so much knowledge I've accumulated over 25 years. I want to do more. There's more that I want to do. Like, how do I accomplish that? And out of that thought came this thing called Simply Compliance. And what that's enabled me to do is really use a range of skills, work with different kinds of clients in different settings, offering different kinds of services. So talk about, almost like compliance on speed. And it's so exciting. It's so amazing. I never know where I'm going to land and what my clients are going to need. And, what are they going to need from me in terms of handling or coaching or mentoring, or will they even need that? Like, what does that relationship looks like? So it's not just about your knowledge of regulations or compliance. It's really about your people skills. How do you get the best out of the people that you're working with? How do you get them to trust you? And you need them to trust you because you want them to be honest so that you can help them. You can give the best advice that you can. But if they're worried or they're afraid or they think you're going to criticize or whatever it is, if they don't feel they can speak with you, they're not going to be honest and transparent about their needs, or maybe something's gone wrong, or they think it's gone wrong, and they're just worried about it, but they won't be honest enough. So my point in saying all of this is that it's not just about your technical skills and your education. There really is a strong element. Just as much of the job is about your people skills as it is about your technical knowledge and your education. So being able to work with all these different parties in all these different areas of compliance and testing myself and being able to do things like podcasts and write blogs and focus on the educational element. I mean, compliance and regulations, we get such a bad rap anyway, right? They're here to slap our wrists. Well, actually, no, many of us aren't. I'm not. I'm in it for a lot of it's the educational piece. And how can we leverage regulatory requirements to actually make your business or your organization better? Because to me, regulations are regulations. I get it. Some of them, you look at them and you're like, who wrote this? Like, why is this here? But actually, a lot of regulations, in my view, in my perspective, right? Some of them are the floor. They're the basic things to make an organization a success in one way or another. They're not always there to get in your way, right? But they can be. So again, I come back to HIPAA because to me it's in many ways a very easy example. HIPAA, if you think about it, is information security. Bottom line, if you simplified it, it is about protecting data. I don't know any organization in this day and age that isn't interested in protecting its data. We have cyber criminals, and you don't have to be in healthcare at all. And think about the data that we hold. It's not just personal information or healthcare information. Think about your corporate information or your contracts or your pricing or who your customers are. Like all of that needs to be protected. HIPAA shouldn't be the reason why you implement information safety controls in a healthcare space. You're doing it because it has nothing to do with HIPAA anymore. You should be doing it to protect your business. And that's what I mean. If you think about regulations as a way of evaluating your organization and saying, hey, are we protecting this organization in the best way that we can? Are we protecting our people, our customers? Are we protecting our intellectual property? If you think about it that way, from my perspective, that's what a lot of the regulations are there to do. Unfortunately, we often think, gee, they're there to get in our way, but actually, no, it's not. And if you change that perspective, and I love being able to say, okay, well, wait a minute. How can we look at these requirements and make your organization stronger? So it's not just about the burden of meeting regulatory requirements. There's an element of that, I'm not going to lie. But there's also an element of actually, can you use your regulations or use these regulations to strengthen your organization? And how do you do that? So that's my very long-winded, super excited. It is genuinely, though, how I feel, which is, I think, why, I'm very passionate about being in the healthcare compliance space, or even in the compliance space, period. I am very excited about it. I am very passionate. Hell, I've been doing it for 25 years. And I'm still smiling and I still have my own hair. I haven't dyed it, guys. There's a little bit of gray. That's how you can tell. And I genuinely love it. And I love it for all of the reasons we've been talking about. So hopefully, Natalie, I've given a decent answer. I don't know if it was what you were expecting.
And there's so many places to take it. So like, I'm just going to start with the HIPAA piece, right? So Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, it's 1 P and 2 A's for folks, not like HIPAA with 2 P's. But I say that because how many times do we see something online where someone goes, that's a HIPAA violation? And it's like, no, it's not. So from a standpoint of, yes, it takes education and knowledge to be able to decipher a lot of these regulations, these controls that are in place. And I think one of the things that I hope to see out of compliance and healthcare in general in the future is translating that in health literacy terms for people to truly understand what it means. And at the heart of HIPAA is the fact that our medical record, when I say our, the patient, is not my medical record. I don't own that medical record. The place that created that record owns it. And if we explain it in a way of that place is responsible for protecting my information to make sure it doesn't end up where it's not supposed to be, it's not me as a human. I'm not in there making sure all the security points are in place and all this kind of stuff. Basically, it's entrusted to that organization to protect that for us. And so I know as a privacy person, I often heard, well, it's my record. Why can't I get access to it? Especially with psych records, things that are very sensitive. And it's like, yeah, but like there's protections in place for a reason. And one of the things I think that often gets lost is the reasoning behind why some of these things have been implemented over time. And the reasoning why, in many instances, compliance officers may know what's not needed anymore. So when we're looking at audits and monitors and we're like, we haven't had a problem with that for 20 years, like we're spending a lot of resources, a lot of time and effort in keeping an eye on these things. And we've made such strides in the industry or technologically that maybe we actually need to roll back or, advocate for rolling back some regulations in order to make space for what is necessary moving forward. I think of AI, like there's going to be so many things with AI that we're going to have to be tapped into. A conference we went to had the best example of you pop in, hey, Chat GPT, give me case law on such and such. But if you don't ask that question right, it will make up case law for you. And there's tons of examples of this right now. So being able to utilize that technology or our advancements in a way that makes sense. Now, I think from a standpoint of how compliance is viewed is, first off, it's actually not very black and white, right? There's components that are written black and white, but it is so gray. Like you said, with a large institution looks very different from your mom and pop primary care shop down the road that maybe just got its first electronic medical record. And again, as patients or as caregivers, understanding that it can't be a one size fits all for some of these things because your care will actually get impacted if you decide that that small group has to do everything a large hospital system does. They may only be able to see 5 patients a day. Like it's a very different world.
Very different environment. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and also, I mean, so some rules and regulations are easier than others, right?
Mm-hmm.
The truth is, if it was all black and white, you would need compliance professionals, but there wouldn't be so much churn in the industry. The truth is, and any attorney will tell you this, and anyone who's worked in compliance will tell you this, and they teach you this at law school. Some laws, some rules, some regulations, they're written badly.
Mm-hmm.
They are actually literally written badly. And you have to go to, in Europe, they called it the preamble to the regulation. And you have to go back, you have to study, like, what was the intent behind it? We struggle with that a little bit in the United States. We go by what's, written down. But some of the rules are written poorly and they're not clear. And also, we make assumptions about how the government gathers information and their experience and their knowledge. So when these regulators draft these rules and regulations, there's an assumption that they know the industry. Well, that's an impossibility,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's the other challenge. The folks who write these rules, I'm not knocking them. Many of them are super smart, super intelligent. They've been in the space for a really long time. But that does not mean they have the equivalent knowledge and experience as those of us who work in the industry. So they will make mistakes in those regulations and those requirements. Think about how many interim and final rules we have to read in order to do our jobs in the healthcare space. And it'll be in any space, really. And I know the government tries to do a lot of consultations and they try to get feedback. But let's think about maybe who's giving that feedback. Who's involved? Is it your small mom and pops? Probably not. It's people with a lot of money who may have lobbying resources, who do have a lot of resource to feed back. So they're the ones with these big voices, and sometimes they represent, I know you have associations and they represent groups of people, and that's great. But if you think about how the messages come in, like there's a lot of politics involved, and there can be a lot of watering down, and there can be a lot of, organizations and organizations that have, certain goals that they're going to lobby for. So these are imperfect instruments, right? And so you get these compliance officers, and you're going back to what you said. Sometimes you're reading it and you're like, well, this is no longer relevant, or there's new stuff coming through, and yet the government's been silent on this. Like and yet these are huge risks here. Like, how do we deal with them? What's going on? And sometimes the rules are written they're so difficult to understand, and that there is just a gray area, and you kind of have to make a best guess and lead an organization or your colleagues and come up with a rationale for why you interpreted the regulations or that final rule or whatever it was in the way that you did. And you try and speak with other compliance professionals. You try and go to compliance conferences or education, or you try and get some interpretation, but sometimes that's not available. And you get different organizations and different groups of compliance professionals and associations interpreting the same rules slightly differently because it's not black and white. So there, I'm sorry, I had to get it in. There's so much here for us to talk about. I don't know where to start and stop.
It's a great warm-up, because the other piece to this is that once you understand that compliance is in black and white, it starts to show the complexities and what defines a good compliance program or good compliance leadership or adjacent leadership from those leaders that then have to, because compliance officers, actually, we have a lot of influence, but the ability to execute managerial things is not necessarily ours. So if we see a violation, we report it, we investigate, we look into things, but the actual task of taking disciplinary action or correcting that falls to the managers that own those processes, falls to the leadership that has those HR ownership components. And so to your point, it is an uncomfortable space to live in sometimes, especially when you have one recommendation and leadership's like, like that's not going to float. My favorite is sometimes when I'm like, I don't care if that's a doctor. The
I
doctor
know.
screwed up and we need to talk about how we're truly going to address this. Sure, if they're your only cardiologist and they've made a major HIPAA breach, it's not like you can just say, bye, see you later, because now we have patients that don't have care. But you have to work together to understand what those needs are. How do we correct? How do we prevent? How do we resolve all of those pieces? And I know one of the historical stigmas or taglines is, I keep you out of jail. And for anyone that has gone to prison or jail as someone that has had a compliance violation, because it happens, especially in fraud cases and willful, ignorance or things like that, will tell you that a good, like, maybe I should have listened to my compliance officer, or my compliance officer wasn't empowered. But in reality, you oftentimes don't hear about the really good compliance people and programs because they're behind the scenes. They are embedded
Right.
at the table from day one, because one of the most powerful things a compliance program can do is ensure that we meet our strategic goals and outcomes expeditiously, legally, in alliance with things. And oftentimes that is them saying, hey, I don't need to be involved in this right now. When you get to XYZ steps, come back and talk to me. Or that's a wonderful idea, but did you know there's about 20 things that may stand in your way on the process to that? So don't get so engaged that then you have to roll back or redo and waste time and energy. And I think that sometimes for leaders that can see this as a slowdown, like, you're preventing me from moving forward, they don't see the long game, which is, I'm slowing now, but in the long game, I'm going to launch a year earlier than everyone else who has to stop at the end point and actually redo everything. So when you look at your kind of experience in the different places you've been in your consultative role that you've had, what are some of those qualities that are the softer qualities of a compliance officer, of a leader, that help to build those relationships and make that cornerstone for what can be or is a quote good compliance program?
Right. So I used to answer and say trust is key. And I've learned that, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but before the words fly out of my head, I would say also, a level of tact, some courage. Because, you were talking about the cardiologist, right? Well, there was a time in my career. I mean, I started this in my early 20s, right? And at the beginning, you're really intimidated by all these clinicians, and they're super smart and they're doing their thing and they're really confident. And here you are, this lowly compliance professional just starting out in their career. But you do have to get beyond job titles, whether it's the CEO or the chief financial officer, or it is a clinician like the medical director. It doesn't matter who it is. There's a point at which you've got to say, I've got a job to do. But that doesn't mean that you go in like a bull in a china shop. It's about knowing your audience, knowing how to speak to that audience, and how to manage that audience. There is a way, but you need the confidence, is what I'm saying. You've got to have that confidence and the courage to say, you know what, park job titles. We're person to person. I've got a job to do. I've got to protect something, or I'm trying to help, to use your words, Natalie, launch something, and I'm trying to do it expeditiously and efficiently because I can see down the line there's going to be a problem, and I'm going to try and help prevent that. So in terms of the softer skills, the ability to build trust, the ability to deal with different audiences and to be tactful, know your audience, and persistence. You know, okay, well, they didn't, you know, this message wasn't quite well received. Okay, well, is there another way to do this? And again, coming back to being willing, I don't know if there's a word for this. I'm sure if I looked in the Oxford Dictionary, there's a word, but I don't know where to start. Being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and knowing how to manage that. So what I mean by that is, okay, you're uncomfortable with maybe the reaction to advice that you gave as a compliance officer, or an instruction that you gave, or a recommendation. Okay, it wasn't well received. The organization, the leadership wants to go in a different direction. All right, well, how do you manage that? Do you sit there and come back to your desk and like bite your nails and think about, oh, well, guess what? That's too bad. You know, it's a decision that was taken over my head. No, you come back, you think about, okay, well, is this a risk? Obviously, it probably was because you raised it. So, well, how do you manage that risk? Do you document it? Where do you put it? How do you maybe decide the outcome? Do you monitor it and think about, well, how do I monitor it? If there are additional risks coming up later on, that I need to give a heads up to the leadership. Okay, well, how do I do that? So that's what I mean by being comfortable with the uncomfortable and knowing how to manage that. So to me, those softer skills, trust, because you're building trust on many different levels. So the same compliance professionals that needs to be comfortable with, you know, people who may be overly confident in their role, or even arrogant, or who may push you away, or who might be at senior leadership. So as much as, you know, you have to be comfortable getting past job titles, especially with more senior leadership, you've also got to be comfortable speaking to patients and having them trust you. You've really got to find a way of tailoring yourself and your communication and your approach with staff who may be really scared to come talk to you. You're the compliance officer, you're compliance. And they often, as much training as you give, they don't always know what that means. And you don't know what they're dealing with. We can say non-retaliation, no bullying. We can say report. But truth, over 25 years, you could say that until you turn blue. If you're an employee and you're in a rough situation and you're being bullied, or you're being, you know you're going to face retaliation, truth, reality check, you're not going to report. It takes a special kind of person. And I don't mean that with any criticism of anyone. I've been in those shoes where I've been afraid to say something, and I'm a compliance officer and I know better, right? But truth is, we all need to work. We're all trying to. So my point is, you need to be prepared as a compliance professional to create a persona for yourself, and the right compliance professional, it's a very natural part of who you are. You're not creating anything. I am very, to say I'm caring is the wrong word, but I do care. And I'm very honest and I'm very transparent with people. And when I say come and talk to me, I really, really mean that. I genuinely wouldn't want anyone to be in a situation So maybe there's an element, a very strong element, I suppose, as we're talking,
Mm-hmm.
it occurs to me that there's a very strong element of empathy. So on the one hand, you've got to be courageous and be brave and put those job titles aside and be comfortable saying what you need to say, however difficult it might be. But the softer skill is being able to convince people as well that you're a safe haven. They can come to you, and you're doing this to protect the organization, right? But you've got to convince employees who may be terrified to come and speak to you. And how do you do that? A lot of it is making sure you interact with people and you're visible and you're approachable and you make it very clear you want to hear from people. You are a safe space. Whether that's an anonymous compliance hotline or coming to speak to you. I know we did things like we would meet people off site in a cafe because they were afraid of being seen, and really saying, okay, well, this is between us, and living up to that. But, making it clear, look, if there's something I have to raise, I'm going to have to speak. We'll try and keep your name out of it to the best of our ability. But living up to what you say you're going to do. Say what you're going to do, show that you're going to do it, and then actually delivering on that promise, and doing it professionally.
Yeah, consistency is one of the main qualities, right? And that goes back to equitable and just and all of those components of, just culture and everything, where no matter, to your point, who's got the title, what the situation is, we look at the facts, we look at what we know, we make recommendations based on that. And you have to take, in many cases, the person out of the situation. But it doesn't mean, to your point, that you can't be a space that still understands that there are unique elements to things that happen. The running joke is you're the compliance officer in the basement. You get the basement office. And in my first job, I literally had the basement office for 5 years, right next to medical records. I mean, that's where we lived for a long time. But I'll never, the chief medical officer, probably right before I got moved up a couple floors, he came in and he said, it's like a beautiful mind in this office. I had like mood lighting. I had all kind of artwork everywhere. One chair for people to come sit in. And I would have people just come sit and take a deep breath for a little bit. They didn't even need anything compliance wise. They just wanted to come disconnect for a minute. And I was the spot that they did it. And then oftentimes something would come up. They'd be like, while I'm here, and you don't realize that makes you very accessible in a lot of ways. And I've had compliance officers when I was more in an advisory role who said, well, I haven't gotten any inquiries lately, or I haven't gotten this. And I said, do they know who you are? And to this person's credit, they went to an employee fair and introduced themselves, and people didn't know who they were. And they're like, you know what? I met a lot of new people today, and that was great. And now I've got follow-up and I'm going to rounds, and so
That's wonderful.
but you have to put yourself out there. And I'll never forget my boss who taught me about compliance. She was the CFO, and she was the one that said, you can do this. We'll coach you, teach you how. Told me that I had to stop emailing people and I needed to go find them, or at minimum pick up the phone and talk to them and be a human. And for someone in my generation that loves text messages, that loves IMs, like that's how I like to do it. It really did change the tone in which people understood how I was trying to interact. And so that ability to smile when you're talking or asking a question, and so they know, oh, I'm not in trouble. This is just a general inquiry.
Yes,
Someone wants to learn and know
absolutely.
more.
Yeah.
And I think those little pieces do make us more just available to folks. And that goes for your auditors, that goes for anyone under the whole kind of chain of the program, because you can only know so much by going through the papers and the pieces. And that's where now we go back again to each organization is so unique. And there's a culture and a behavior to those organizations that's going to come into play and tell us where our high risk areas are. And it's something I want to touch on is, as a compliance professional, as someone that now is in a consulting role, sometimes what we may be doing is saying, it's okay to take that risk. Like, it's
Very much
actually
so.
okay to to, just explore a little bit here, or no, I'm not super worried about this. If we want to, change our cadence at what we're looking at, it's okay to do that. You have higher areas that you need to focus on right now. And I think often it goes back to leaders may think that we're trying to shut things down or slow things down. And in reality, I may be calling and saying, we can go ahead and move that audit to next month. Like, we've got flexibility, and you should take all of my auditors and do a probe audit of this thing so that you can go live with it tomorrow. And so I would have there been examples of things where you're like, that's when my leader, the light bulb went off, or you've seen it in organizations where they went, oh, I have a partner right now in this. And that, because I think it's hard for people to grasp that if they haven't been in that seat and they haven't seen that leader go, oh, I'm so glad you're here.
I learned really early on, and by accident, about how to build a great partnership. And it really is. I'll tell you a funny story. So my first job in London, I was running a training department for this hospital where I would eventually come into this thing we now call compliance. And the training department, it really wasn't well run at the time. And I walked into a bit of a rat's nest. But I was the only American, so everyone kind of treated me with a little bit of caution because, she's strange. She has a strange accent. And at that time, believe it or not, the training department for induction, for your orientation, they would have tea and coffee and like some cookies that they would serve to all the new hires. And it was really sweet. What I didn't know was that my manager, I guess, had a terrible relationship with the kitchen who provided all this stuff. It was awful. He wouldn't pay them. He would not pay them. So they would go through all the work in this hospital. It's the same, cafeteria that provided the food for the hospital. So imagine morning, they're trying to get out all this stuff for patients and they're so busy and they're getting out this tea and this coffee and these biscuits, these cookies, and they're trying to get there on time, even though we were on the other side of the property, and then they don't get paid. And so they didn't want to serve any of this again. And they were so angry. And I come in and I don't know. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what's going on. And they take it out on me because, well, they don't know I'm brand new and they're obviously upset. And my manager's going, how come we don't have these tea and coffee and all this stuff? And I'm like, what's going on here? So I know this isn't compliance related, but here's the point. So at some point I talked to the manager of the kitchen and I said, hey, why don't first of all, I'm going to make sure you're paid. And I did. I went through all the books. I made sure that kitchen got paid. But they still didn't want to work with us. They wanted nothing to do with us. It was too stressful. I said, okay, look, I'll come in and I'll help. I know I'm running this training department, but I will come in early on induction days, which is once a week, orientation. Show me what to do and I will help. I realize there's so much pressure on you at that time. Of course, this is a problem for you and it's so stressful. She was so shocked. And I did. I came in, I worked with her and the staff, and I trotted all that stuff myself on a cart so that they didn't have to do it. I think I did that twice before the whole relationship and dynamic changed. And they were like, right, if you can get us a consistent order form, we love you. Like, they didn't say we love you. They were like, we're good. We can now organize this and we'll do it. And what happened was I must have unknowingly, because it wasn't intentional. I was too young. I was too new in the role and in my career. I really just wanted to solve a problem and help. But what I learned from that was the power of partnership. And they recognized it and they respected it. And I have to tell you, from that day forward, I never once had a problem. And if I needed something last minute, which was horrible for them because that's an unnecessary pressure when you're trying to get food ready for a hospital. But there were times when I had to call very last minute and say, hey, I need some additional food or resources for this and this meeting. Do you want to know something? Never once did they give me a hard time. Never once did they say, okay, but we're going to be late. Jessica, never once did they say, Hal, you know how busy we are. Never. They were, from then on, they were like, you need it? Fine. We've got it. Do not worry about it. We will be right there. Never once. It was the most amazing relationship. So what did I learn? Like, that was a cornerstone of my career. What it taught me was the value of partnership. And I'll give you guys a tip, right? Part of what makes a great compliance officer and helps build that partnership and that trust is your willingness to learn. That was another thing I learned by accident. And it's not just putting yourself in front of your colleagues or the organization, but being comfortable enough to say, can you teach me a bit more about what you do? And so that builds partnership. Suddenly, people are looking at you and going, oh, you're interested in us? And I wish, Natalie, that I could give you an example of when that kind of spark went, except that I've done it so many times when people realize you're not there to bite them, you're not there to criticize, and you take them by surprise by saying something like, hey, what you do is amazing. It's really complex. Would you mind? So I think about, actually, I can't give you an example because it really hit me hard, right? So member services within a large organization. Okay, you don't always think of member services or customer services as having a role in compliance or regulatory, but I worked for an organization that had Medicaid, Medicare, TRICARE. Sorry. Had TRICARE. And so, customer services and how quickly you turned around phone calls and how many calls you took an hour, this is all heavily regulated, and you're recorded in what you say, and you have to have enough knowledge and experience to answer the questions and help your members and your patients. You know what? I never knew how much work and effort was involved in member services. Everyone thinks that customer services folks, like, they're dispensable. You can, they come and they go, and it's an easy job. I went to audit. I was doing actually a compliance audit. And as I did this audit, I realized how much education my colleagues in customer services had. It was a light bulb moment for me. And when I then went to the leadership and the management of customer services, and I said that, and I said, okay, this is amazing. What you guys do is amazing. Your staff are amazing. Oh my God, people have notes on their desks and they have notebooks and binders because the information is so complex, and they go through 6 weeks of training minimum, and they're constantly having training. And I remember the leadership being like, and they told me, they said, no one's ever come to us and said what you're saying. And it's true. We are so stressed out. We, all these regulations, but no one really works with us. And that's another team that, like, from then on, and we did all kinds of projects. We thought about, well, how do you make data collection for compliance easier? And we really partnered together, and it was easier to explain where the compliance function and the regulatory requirements fit in. And I got to understand the challenges that, customer services were facing. But I will never forget when they realized I was genuinely interested and I genuinely meant what I said about the complexity of their work. And I really wanted to help and pitch in. It meant everything to that leadership team. And as I got to know more of their staff, and I introduced my team, my compliance team, to more of their staff, and we worked more together. Honestly, I could not have had better champions within the organization. Everyone understood compliance and why we were there. And we could have conversations about the challenges. And if, we had a complaint come in from a patient, or there were audit findings that weren't exactly 100% positive, you could have that conversation and collaborate on a solution. It wasn't going in and saying, I'm going to impose a solution on you because I know so much better than you. Like, no, I don't do that job every day. And I had a lot of respect for my colleagues. But equally, they understood now, hey, there's a need to do better in this particular area. We can talk to Jessica. Maybe we've got some ideas. And it's a safe space to say, okay, well, what might work for us? And use her as a sounding board. So hopefully I've answered that question. It's just that I see the light bulb quite often. It's one of the things that keeps me going. Like when you see someone's eyes go, oh, she's genuinely interested. She genuinely cares about what we do and she wants to learn and pitch in, like she's on our side. Oh. And people respond to you very differently, and they start to be much more open to the conversation that you need to have. Hopefully I've answered your question.
You did. And I think it sets this up. It's going to be a great kind of lead into that part 2 that we're going to have with compliance deconstructed, because it's that the stigma of compliance officers are the police officers, right? We're coming in, we're finding the bad things. But in reality, when you look at the 3 components of prevention, detection, correction, it serves us best to be majority prevention, which is the collaborative piece, which is the learning. And I think for some people, they have a hard time grasping that you can do oversight and be in an objective oversight role and still be involved in those early phases. So again, it's that standpoint of owning processes or being management versus providing consultation, providing collaboration, stress testing things. I mean, the instances where I'm like, let me run a quick probe audit on your process or a review,
yes.
and I can tell you what's going to fail. It's the lean process, it's value mode, HFMEAs, all that kind of stuff. We can be there and still step back, let everything go into effect, and then come do that observation and that oversight at a later space and time. It doesn't mean that we're monitoring ourselves. And I think that's a hard thing for folks to grasp, is this idea of, well, if I was involved, I'm going to be biased when I go in and do the review. And it's like, no, if you have a well-constructed plan and program, there are clear delineations on when you step back, when you are not involved, when you become re-involved. And that whole premise, again, of a good program, a good person, is generally going to be more on that front end and during strategic planning, during all of those. Let me help you define what your monitor should be. Don't tell me what the monitor is. And then I'm looking at this going, this doesn't make any sense. Like, why am I tracking this for customer service when in reality, I should be looking at a risk-driven metric to help you determine, are you really kind of dealing with that core root cause that, is a high risk area.
Sing it, Natalie. Sing it from the mountaintops. So I don't want to be the police officer.
Right.
I'll be honest with you. Yeah, sometimes that's kind of like an enforcer role is part of the job, but that's not a part of the job that I'm most comfortable with. Not even after 25 years. You do it because there's a place and you need to do it. But actually, that's not my favorite place. I know some people, we're all different, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all have different comfort zones, but I'm very much like you. I'm in it for the collaboration, the problem solving. And I really wish that organizations and teams involve their compliance colleagues much earlier on in the planning phase. First of all, for me, that's fun.
Mm-hmm.
Like I get to be, I get to contribute. I get to help problem solve. I get to help, build this part of the organization or this process or whatever it is. And we get to do it collaboratively. Like that is fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really cool place to be versus later on. Oh my God, this has all gone wrong. So whether it's, you're doing due diligence, whether on another organization, or whether you're putting in a new process, or whether you're considering a particular vendor, or, you're building out a new program or whatever. There are so many different things that we could be talking about. Mm-hmm. I'm like you, please, 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 whatever you do, involve your compliance officer from the beginning, from the very first conversations. They're not going to try and get in your way. We're not there to tell you no. Like that's not what I want to do. Mm-hmm. What I want to do is figure out how to get you to, really quick. And sometimes, most of the time, actually, that's pretty easy. if you're doing it from the beginning and you're working together and you're talking, you're building that compliance right from the beginning. It's like a nothing. It's so part of the infrastructure and the foundation that you don't even notice necessarily that it's there, versus the opposite end of the spectrum when there's a problem and you're like, well, this is now going to be so much harder to fix.
Right. Well, and if compliance professionals are listening and you're wondering, well, how the heck do I even get started on that path? I will say the one thing that worked for me is I would go to leaders and I'd say, can I sit in on that meeting? I won't say a word. Just let me listen. And that goes back to your teach me, tell me about these things, let me understand. So if they know and you've promised, I'm not going to open my mouth. I may come talk to you afterwards because I heard some things and I just want to kind of understand or, bring to your attention. But they're often fine with that. And I was in a couple where they would say, Natalie's here. Don't worry, she's just listening. Like, just do your thing. She's just in the back. She's trying to learn. And so it created that safe psychological kind of component within the room that people weren't buttoned up as much, especially if they didn't know me well or didn't understand compliance. So I would encourage people, talk to your leadership and say, hey, can I at least just sit in? Like, I just want to learn more about that process. And you'll build that kind of trust and compassion, I think, over time. But I am thrilled kind of as we get into when we're going to have a couple more people on part 2 chiming in on some of these things, because I always think that social work background that I have has been one of the biggest skills to take in and apply to these. But there are so many wonderful technical and soft skill components that play into what makes a robust kind of group plan. And when we think of compliance being everyone's job, and then you have the spearheaded leader of your compliance officer, it's finding people with those skills. So even if you don't come in, Jessica, like you with a legal background or me with social work, finding those people that get what you're doing and have those components to be a part of that effort, I think is great. And we'll talk to the other hosts that you have. So tell me a little bit about Compliance Deconstructed, where we can find information on you, Simply Compliance, so that folks can join us for part 2 of this conversation when we even get into more insights from more experiences.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's Compliance Deconstructed. Our next episode will be with Natalie and with Elvon Baker and Lori Davis. If you've been listening to Compliance Deconstructed, you recognize those names, and we have a really great time. So super excited about our part 2. You can find the podcast. You can get it from my website. If you Google Simply Compliance, it'll come up. If you use ChatGPT and say Compliance Deconstructed, it comes up. Or any of your traditional Apple, YouTube. I'm sure there's one more that I'm missing because I leave this to my production manager and he does all the technical stuff. But if you Google simply Compliance Deconstructed, it'll come right up. And you can find any of our previous episodes. And we welcome feedback as well.
And if anyone's interested in the services you offer through Simply Compliance, we'll put your website right in the show description so people can find that information, because I do think it's something that, one, is hard for organizations to invest in, especially when they're starting out, they're smaller, or they're going through major transitions. And so knowing where you have availability to pull in consultants for that, or to have those external groups come in, test some of the stuff out. If you've heard Jess talking today, this is not going to be a let me come in with my Thor hammer and slam things down. It's a very, I think, different approach to what we may have seen in the past. And it's reflective of the development and growth of truly compliance being embedded and integrated into what makes good operations, not only, as you mentioned, in healthcare, but in all of our adjacent organizations, in anything, that really has some type of component of, in order to do this right, there are some rules and regs that we need to keep in mind. So this is a huge industry. It's continuing to grow, but it's also one that I think is becoming more robust and more integrated, and it makes for a really interesting kind of world. So I think if you've been intrigued by anything you heard today, examples that you heard from you, Jessica, or any of those pieces, that you can also reach out to us and say, is the compliance career maybe right for me? How do I even get started? And our LinkedIn's will be there too for you. So Jessica, thank you so much for this great kind of kickoff to this conversation. I love talking about it. I know you love talking about it, and I'm glad we're going to get to continue it in just a couple of weeks on the next release of Compliance Deconstructed. So thank you.
Same here. You notice we didn't run out of conversation at any point. So for those of you who are listening, this is us. We're clearly very passionate about what we do, and interested in sharing that passion. So Natalie's right. Please do reach out to us if you ever just want to talk. Please, this is the kind of stuff we love to do. So thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been absolutely lovely.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. We will talk soon.